What year would you pick if someone asked you to name the worst in human history? The year 536 AD was the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year, according to medieval scholar Michael McCormick, although he did make that statement in 2018. Perhaps the intervening years would have convinced him otherwise. Still, what exactly was so bad about 536? Keep watching this video to know why the year 536 AD is given the title, the worst year to be alive in human history. It was entirely the fault of a significant global event, probably a huge volcanic eruption, much like the year without a summer in 1816, though temperatures dropped much lower and for much longer in 536. People starved, crops failed, the skies turned dark, and life was generally miserable for years. But even after the medieval calendars were turned to 537, the suffering persisted. It was the coldest decade in more than 2,000 years, and the terrible plague made matters worse. The effects of the decade were still being felt more than a century later. It was generally quite bad. Things probably weren't great in 535 either. Life was already difficult for the typical person in Europe, the Middle East, or Asia before the year 536. The Americas are less well known, but we can assume that conditions were challenging there as well. The peasantry toiled in the fields all day, fending off pillaging, wars, and disease that ravaged through their villages year-round, while the emperors, kings, lords, and so on lived comfortably in their castles and enjoyed lifestyles of luxury, although not quite comparable to the Romans, but not far off as well. Due to the fact that the majority of peasants were kept as serfs, the majority of their harvest was taxed, and only enough was left for them to survive the year. The adage that peasants only took 2 baths in their lifetime, one at birth and one at death, emphasizes how bad hygiene was. Other unknowing villagers would wash their faces or enjoy a refreshing drink after a long day of work by the river or in the street, where human waste was dumped. Naturally, disease was a problem to some extent. Although the term plague was generally used, the majority may have actually been smallpox rather than the bubonic variety. In the first year, half of all newborns passed away. So, what could be possibly worse than this? The long-suffering peasantry woke up one day in 536, believing that things couldn't possibly get worse, and looked up to a cold, weak sun that was at first bluish in color. We are aware of this because the dust in the atmosphere, which was likely released into the atmosphere as a result of an Icelandic volcanic eruption that had been observed in more recent times, reflected other colors away. Without knowing this, the terrified people who were gazing up at that typically large, glowing ball must have interpreted its new appearance as a sinister and menacing sign, perhaps even a sign of the end of the world. When they looked down and discovered their astonishment that they had no shadows, this would have been evidenced. Although it seems pretty simple to us now, back then it was so startling that a number of scholars made the effort to document the enigmatic disappearance of their shadows. The air would have felt noticeably cooler almost immediately by 2.5 degrees Celsius. That may not seem like much, but when you consider that only half of that has happened in the past century due to global warming, you can see the potential impact that such a rapid and drastic change could have. While most of Europe experienced frost and frozen soil, which killed their crops or prevented them from growing, China experienced snowfall in August. What little food was available ran out quickly, and people soon started to starve. Even the largest and richest empires, like the Byzantines, centered on Constantinople, found it difficult to alleviate the famine that existed within their borders. Unaware of what had happened, a large number of people who didn't have access to an emperor who was generous and kind packed up their belongings and left. Huge numbers of people moved around, including nomadic Easterners who didn't get along with the locals they met. The temperatures from January 1st, 537 didn't get back to normal. The world continued to be colder than before as it took time for the effects of what must have been a massive eruption, possibly larger than Krakatoa's in 1816, to dissipate. After the skies cleared, those who were still alive struggled to get a good yield from their crops. Records from across Europe show mounting bodies and poor harvests in various kingdoms. 2 more volcanic eruptions are known to have occurred in the years 540 and 547, which only served to make things worse and prolong the suffering. We don't know where they did it, but they certainly multiplied the effects of 536. The late antique Little Ice Age now refers to this time period, which lasted until around 660 AD. The Justinian Plague, which likely originated in central China and spread across the Eurasian continent in 541, reached Europe via western trade routes. The bubonic plague was caused by the same bacterium that caused the Black Death, and it was named for the Byzantine emperor of the time who had once also contracted it. In the years immediately after 536, the Mochi people of Peru experienced 30 years of intense rainfall, resulting in floods, followed by 30 years of drought. So that's the end of the video. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and press the notification bell so you never miss out on our next videos. Until the next video, take care.